Welcome all of you, the viewers of Poland Daily Culture. My name is Marek, and today we are talking about startups, investments, because with me in the studio is Marek Zmysłowski, an author of a book. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Your book is Chasing the Unicorns.
Chasing Black Unicorns.
Chasing Black Unicorns. It's even more, even more unique, let's say. And it's about the startups in Africa, which you have a very mainly, and you have we have a huge experience about this part of the world and this field. So first of all, tell us how, like a Polish businessman, ended up taking care of and running startups in Africa, and what sort of journey was it?
Well, how did it end up like this for me? It always starts with this looking like a coincidence, but then in hindsight, it looks like destiny. I started in so-called startups, which is a fast-growing but high-risk organization, usually in new technology sector. In my case, it was online travel and e-commerce in Poland. And then I got hired by an investment fund who at that time was looking to do some bold moves and bold investments into Africa. Because a few years back, when you look at Africa, you assumed the economy is growing, the country and the market, the countries and the markets will become more and more democratic, more and more capital-loving, more and more globalized. So in the end, users will behave the same way as they behave in Europe and the US. So on that premise, you assume they're going to need their own version of Amazon, Uber, Booking.com, Expedia, and so on. So let's build those businesses before the big guys really want to come. That was our investment thesis. So I was responsible for building, let's just say, the African version of Expedia. And it was the adventure of my life. I moved there in 2014, and I've stayed in Nigeria first for 3.5 years. Company went public as a bigger e-commerce group together as Jumia Travel. And then I moved to Kenya. I also moved to South Africa. In general, I have collected experience running businesses, starting them from scratch, first in Europe, in Poland. So you can say the more bureaucratic, more organized type of market, but still very early when you compare to other Western European countries. But then in Nigeria, which is as crazy as it gets. So that gave me a good perspective, a wide perspective on how other markets will look like. And the two extreme types of experiences then really prepared me to Dominican Republic, which for me is like perfectly in the middle between Europe and Africa when it comes to development. It's still kind of crazy, right? But it has huge potential and it's way more organized than Africa, yes. And close to nature, yeah.
So, but definitely, well, I'd say Africa is also very close to nature, but it's sort of a risk. We're speaking here about Kenya out of all of those three.
And Nigeria mainly, yes.
Yeah. Yes, seems the most, let's say, stable. The rest, it's like being sort of in a jungle where anything can happen to like lack of electricity, for example. So, what was the biggest challenge for you looking at this way? You needed also to be there such a long time, which is for a Polish person a totally different place to live.
Yeah, so I lived there full time between 2013 and 2018, if I remember correctly. And then obviously a few years later, after 2018 till 2022, I was like working part-time with this region. So I guess I got to know Sub-Saharan Africa pretty well. What can I say? None of the experience in Europe can prepare you for what Africa is preparing for you. Simply because the types of challenges for a businessman are way different. I mean, even starting with infrastructure, right? When you build an e-commerce business in Europe, you can leverage the existing roads network. You can take advantage of the existing warehousing network or courier companies network. If you wanted to build an e-commerce website in 2013 in Nigeria, you also had to build your own courier company, and you also had to your own warehouse because there was no existing well-developed infrastructure that you could build on top of. The type of client, although there are clients who have the money, the market is way more, what's the word, saturated? Not saturated is not. There's a big difference between the rich and the poor. So although, for example, Nigeria is a huge country, we're talking about almost 200 million people, there's only 2 million people who make more than $1,000 per month, right? So
that sounds crazy. So it's a huge gap.
Huge gap, right? So this also affects your ability to expand, and so on and so on. So very challenging, especially because the types of challenging are not
the one you expect.
Exactly. So you can be experienced in Europe, you're still going to feel like a rookie in Africa.
Sounds crazy. So the question is, how did you end up writing a book about it?
So I always wanted to write a book, and I figured every time I find a problem, I want to tackle the problem by reading a lot about this problem. So when I was moving to Nigeria 10 years ago, actually that was already 10 years ago, I was looking for any possible book about running a business in Nigeria, and guess what? There was nothing, right? If someone wrote a book about Africa, I was some university professor trying to understand Africa, or some crazy guy driving his motorbike through the desert. There was no practical business books. So, especially in IT, about IT or e-commerce. So I remember thinking, maybe I'll be the one that writes this. So I would write a series of blog posts or even articles for myself for years to come. And then I had one big problem in Africa when one of my business partners tried to basically put me to jail. He bribed the Nigerian police to put me to jail because he wanted to force me to sell him the company for free, which resulted in 2 years of me fighting for justice in courts. And I did win, although it was an extremely hard experience for me. But then I've realized my book just became way more interesting, because it's not just a boring book about building a website in Nigeria, but there's also some criminal aspects to it, simply because of my adventures with adventures, quote unquote, with the courts and with the police. So writing the book really gave me motivation to fight for justice in courts, because I knew that I have to win in order to have a happy end. So it was also like a therapy for me. Yeah.
Sounds crazy, but also very challenging. We'll talk about more in the next episode, but to all of you, the viewers of Poland Daily, it's a wonderful invitation. You have to pick up Chasing Black Unicorn of Marek Zmysłowski and read it. Type in the comment what you think about it. And again, thank you very much for watching our show.